Level 1. The Garage Subcontractor. You pull up to the garage bay in an old van. At the back service road, you open the trunk toward the industrial park wall. You read $34,000 per year written across the plastic screw tray. You grip the box of carbon arms before the trunk drops lower. Across the back service road, you drag the box by one torn corner. You push the box onto the metal workbench. At the metal workbench, you set safety glasses over your eyes. You snap the anti-static wrist strap around your wrist. You pull the foam airframe jig away from the locked military crate. Beside the foam airframe jig, you pour screws into the plastic screw tray. You read $90,000 subcontract marked along the edge of the plastic screw tray. Against the shelf of carbon tubes, you choose the straightest carbon arm. You press the carbon arm into the foam airframe jig. With the hex key, you test the bracket against the carbon arm. You drip thread locker onto a tiny screw. You tighten the screw with the hex key until your fingers shake. At the metal workbench, you hold the carbon arm down through the tremor. You keep the locked military crate outside your reach on the next shelf. You choose a second carbon arm from the shelf of carbon tubes. Beside the foam airframe jig, you seat the second carbon arm into place. You tighten the second screw until the bracket stops shifting. With the small bottle of thread locker, you wet the next screw head. You pull a black zip tie from the plastic screw tray. At the metal workbench, you thread the black zip tie through the motor cover. You cut the zip tie tail flush with side cutters. You slide the motor cover into the airframe body. Near the dusty floor by the compressor, you set the airframe on the bench edge. You pull the compressor hose from the dusty floor near the compressor. You blow carbon dust off the metal workbench with the compressor hose. Behind safety glasses, you turn your face from the carbon dust. You place one finished airframe beside the foam airframe jig. At the shelf of carbon tubes, you reach for a cleaner tube instead of a faster shortcut. You understand the first defense gate is material discipline. You pick up the bent carbon propeller from the plastic screw tray. Under the garage bay light, you run your thumb across the white stress crack. You bend the propeller only enough to catch the crack near the hub. At the metal workbench, you drop the cracked carbon propeller into a separate reject tray. You keep the flyable airframe away from the reject tray. Across the back service road, you carry the finished airframe toward the old van. You stack the finished airframe into the trunk of the old van. Behind the old van, you wipe carbon dust from your safety glasses. You return to the metal workbench for the cracked carbon propeller. Inside the garage bay, you hold the cracked carbon propeller in one raised hand. Level 2. The Prototype Bench Technician. You tap your badge against the secured lab entrance. Inside the secured lab entrance, you read $68,000 per year on the anti-static mat. You enter the micro soldering station with clean hands. At the anti-static workbench, you touch the anti-static mat with your palm. You clip the anti-static strap to your wrist. Under the magnifying lamp, you set the flight controller on the red anti-static pad. You clamp the flight controller under the magnifying lamp. Beside the micro soldering station, you read $650,000 prototype contract on the fireproof battery bag. You lift the fine-tip soldering iron from the holder. With the fine-tip soldering iron, you tin one contact on the flight controller. You lower the GPS wire onto the tinned contact. You solder the GPS wire onto the flight controller. With tweezers, you tug the GPS wire to test the joint. You set the spool of solder beside the anti-static mat. At the battery storage cabinet, you open the fireproof bag with both hands. You remove the lithium battery from the fireproof bag with both hands. You keep the lithium battery away from bare metal. Beside the anti-static workbench, you lower the lithium battery into the airframe. You seat the battery until the gap around the latch is even. With the small torque driver, you tighten the board fasteners. You press a blue battery seal over the battery latch. At the anti-static workbench, you check the seal edge with one fingernail. You rotate the airframe only enough to see the flight controller. Under the magnifying lamp, you confirm the GPS wire still rests flat. You understand the drone no longer needs brute force. You carry the blue-sealed airframe into the motor test cage. At the motor test cage, you place the airframe inside the mesh door. You keep the lithium battery inside the sealed airframe. Through the mesh door, you reach for the red Remove Before Flight pin. You pull the red Remove Before Flight pin from the locked drone. Behind the safety line, you keep both hands away from the mesh door. You watch the flight controller through the cage mesh. At the micro soldering station, you return the fine-tip soldering iron to the holder. You slide the fireproof bag back into the battery storage cabinet. At the parking lot outside the lab building, you stop before carrying the battery outside. You keep the sealed drone on the lab side of the route. Back at the motor test cage, you stand behind the safety line. You hold the red Remove Before Flight pin while the drone stays locked inside the cage. Level 3. The Quality Inspector. You walk through the assembly floor entrance wearing safety glasses. At the assembly floor entrance, you read $112,000 per year on the green acceptance tag. You move along the row of worker benches without touching worker tools. Beside the worker benches, you lift a finished carbon motor arm by the end. You hold the motor arm under the worker bench light. At the incoming parts inspection area, you sweep the ultraviolet seal light across battery module tape. You read $4,800,000 first low-rate batch on the foam transport insert. With the gap gauge, you slide metal between the shell and the battery latch. You pause before the gap gauge touches the battery module. You test the motor fastener with the torque driver without turning the fastener farther. At the final acceptance table, you bend the carbon motor arm toward the light. You catch a pale delamination line along the carbon motor arm. You remove the green acceptance tag from the drone. Beside the final acceptance table, you loop a red rejection tag around the motor arm. You cinch the red rejection tag tight around the carbon motor arm. At the row of worker benches, you hold up the rejected arm without repairing the arm. You keep the torque driver pointed down at your side. Near the incoming parts inspection area, you compare the cracked arm to clean carbon. You understand the batch now trusts your refusal more than your repair skill. You carry the rejected drone against your ribs. At the quarantine rack, you place the rejected drone on the lower rail. You leave the bad solder trace untouched beneath the shell. Back at the final acceptance table, you close the foam transport insert over an accepted neighboring airframe. You press tamper-evident tape across the accepted case. With the ultraviolet seal light, you sweep the tape one more time. You attach the green acceptance tag to the accepted case. At the shipping ramp, you nudge the rejected case away with your boot. You keep the accepted case aligned with the ramp edge. Beside the shipping ramp, you check the green tag before the case moves forward. You stop beside the shipping ramp and accept the weight of blocking finished aircraft. At the quarantine rack, you hold the red rejection tag until the worker benches go still. You set the torque driver beside the incoming parts inspection area. You walk back along the row of worker benches with empty hands. At the quarantine rack, you stand with the rejected drone below your hand. Level 4. The Field Training Engineer. You drive through the Army Test Range Gate in a pickup loaded with cases. At the Army Test Range Gate, you read $158,000 per year on the transport case lid. You keep the dusty transport case strapped in the pickup bed. Beside the gravel parking area, you pull the dusty transport case off the pickup. You drag the transport case across gravel beside the pickups. Under the field tent, you open the transport case in front of soldiers. You read $23 million troop evaluation on the foam cutout inside the case. At the row of folding chairs for soldiers, you lift the training drone from the foam. You carry the training drone back under the field tent. You pull a soldier's glove onto a soldier's hand. With the training drone balanced in your palms, you turn the soldier's palm under the airframe. You guide the soldier's thumb toward the battery latch. You stop the soldier's wrist before the glove reaches the wrong propeller. Beside the dusty launch pad, you hold a spare propeller beside a cracked one. You show the difference with one finger. At the dusty launch pad, you place the training drone in front of the soldier. You pull the Remove Before Flight pin from the training drone. You place the Remove Before Flight pin into the soldier's palm. At the dusty launch pad, you raise the red safety flag. You angle the folding antenna toward the training route. Near the landing net zone, you step behind the landing net. You nod to the soldier without taking the drone back. Behind the landing net, you pause with the red safety flag upright. You understand the machine now has to survive user hands. After the landing, you separate the hot battery from the airframe. At the field tent, you set the hot battery block away from the transport case. You keep the airframe clear of the hot battery. At the row of folding chairs for soldiers, you hold the cracked propeller beside the spare propeller. You let the soldiers see the stress crack before the next kit opens. Beside the gravel parking area, you carry the dusty transport case back toward the pickup. You check the foam cutouts before returning the training drone. Under the field tent, you close the dusty transport case with the training drone inside. At the Army test range gate, you keep the case closed for the ride out. You return to the dusty launch pad with the red safety flag. At the dusty launch pad, you hold the red safety flag while the soldier waits with the drone. Level 5. The Capture Manager. You pass through the security screening corridor at the conference center. Inside the security screening corridor, you read $246,000 per year on the metal cost token. You keep the closed red proposal folder against your chest. In the closed negotiation room, you set the transport case beside the long table. You turn the latches toward your side of the long table. You open the transport case without moving the red proposal folder. At the long table, you rotate the demilitarized drone toward the military buyers. You remove the battery mock-up from the transport case. Beside the sample foam insert, you set the battery mock-up flat. You read $96 million competitive supply award on the second metal cost token. Across the long table, you slide the metal cost token toward the prime contractor's representative. You pin a red risk tab against the battery mock-up. At the edge of the long table, you pull the closed red proposal folder back. You keep the demilitarized module on your side of the long table. You shake your head at the prime contractor's representative. With one palm, you snap one latch on the transport case shut. You take a second cost token from your jacket pocket. Beside the small unit flag, you move the second cost token closer. You leave the roll of tamper-evident tape between the two sides of the table. At the closed negotiation room wall, you turn the sample foam insert toward the military buyers. You compare the battery mock-up to the empty cutout in the sample foam insert. You hold the red risk tab down until the prime contractor's representative stops reaching. You close the transport case completely when the military buyers start whispering. You keep the demilitarized drone inside the closed case. In the side room for breaks, you keep the red proposal folder closed. You roll the metal cost token once under your thumb. At the side room table, you understand production can die inside a generous-looking price. You return to the closed negotiation room with the cost token still in your fist. At the long table, you place the cost token beside the small unit flag. You keep the roll of tamper-evident tape between the two sides. At the parking area with government SUVs, you keep the transport case close to your leg. You walk past the government SUVs without opening the red proposal folder. Beside the long table, you stand with the closed transport case in front of you. Level 6. The Cleared Team Builder. You meet the candidate in the lobby of the new factory. At the lobby of the new factory, you read $520,000 per year on the empty badge holder. You clip the empty badge holder onto the candidate's shirt. Through the empty production hall, you walk the candidate past production line mock-ups. You stop beside the production line mock-up and clear the aisle with one gesture. You offer the candidate an anti-static wrist strap. Beside the production line mock-up, you watch the candidate clip the strap to ground. You give the candidate a test motor assembly and a torque driver. You watch whether the candidate checks the fastener without overturning the fastener. At the motor test cage, you point to the red emergency stop button. You bring the test pilot candidate to the red emergency stop button. You read $340 million funded production expansion on the production line mock-up. Inside the battery room, you take a second candidate to the battery table. You point at a battery fireproof bag with Velcro left open. You wait while the second candidate closes the Velcro. You watch the second candidate move the battery bag away from the table edge. At the future packaging line, you place a foam insert for a cereal case. You set the candidate helmet onto the foam insert of the chosen person's cereal case. You compare empty badge holders along the factory table. You insert an access card into only one empty badge holder. Near the exit toward the flight test yard, you hold back the unbadged candidate. You keep the unbadged candidate outside the flight test yard route. At the motor test cage, you touch the red emergency stop button without pressing the button. You turn back from the exit toward the flight test yard. At the future packaging line, you align the chosen badge holder with the foam insert. You understand scale begins with the person allowed through a restricted door. You leave the unchosen empty badge holders in a row. Back in the empty production hall, you hold the chosen badge holder above the production line mock-up. You carry the chosen badge holder toward the lobby of the new factory. At the factory table, you set the chosen badge holder apart from the empty holders. You stand beside the chosen badge holder with the access card locked inside. Level 7. The Program of Record Director. You pass through the large range checkpoint in a convoy of loaded trucks. At the checkpoint of a large test range, you read $1,400,000 per year on the yellow director vest. You step out beside the command tent wearing the yellow director vest. Outside the command tent, you lift the test window baton above your head. You read $1,700,000,000 program of record on the sealed cereal case tag. Toward the convoy of trucks loaded with cases, you point the packaging team forward. You direct the packaging team toward the sealed cereal case. Beside the command tent, you direct engineers toward the field antenna tripod. You turn the pilot operators toward the small UAV launch strip with one arm motion. At the military acceptance line beside the trucks, you point the acceptance inspector toward the case seal. You keep your hands off the sealed cereal case. You signal the seal technician to cut the tape with seal-cutting pliers. At the target zone marker, you lower the emergency flag when the range clears. You hold the test window baton across your chest. At the small UAV launch strip, you keep the pilot operators moving without touching the drone. You extend the baton toward the landing net after the drone returns. Beside the battery container, you split two crews apart when the container overheats. You direct the backup battery container toward the operators. Near the field antenna tripod, you raise the baton when the military observer gives a thumbs up. You lead the acceptance inspector to the military acceptance line beside the trucks. At the military acceptance line, you keep the sealed cereal case between the inspector and the trucks. You stop the packaging team before the case reaches the wrong side of the line. At the convoy of loaded trucks, you turn the baton toward the next sealed cereal case. You understand your hands now move crews instead of aircraft. Beside the command tent, you lower the baton after the cereal test. You turn the baton toward the convoy of loaded trucks. At the military acceptance line beside the trucks, you hold the test window baton above your head. Level 8. The Prime Defense Contractor. You arrive at the main gate of the secure production campus in a government convoy. At the main gate, you read $6 million per year with equity and bonuses on the bronze key tag. You raise the bronze production hangar key in front of the gate guards. You unlock the clean production hangar door with the bronze key. Inside the clean production hangar, you enter the final assembly line first. You read $12 billion multi-year framework program on the factory line nameplate. At the final assembly line, you remove the protective antenna cover from the first serial drone. You step aside so the production crew can roll the serial drone forward. You lead the inspector in white gloves to the military acceptance zone. Beside the military acceptance zone, you point to the factory line nameplate above the first assembly cell. You lift the ribbon-cutting scissors beside the row of Allied flags. At the small platform beside Allied flags, you cut the ribbon in front of the final assembly line. You nod to the acceptance team beside the battery container. At the capsule loading pad, you wait beside the first serial transport capsule. You watch the inspector snap the military acceptance seal onto the first transport capsule. You rest your palm on the sealed capsule without opening the capsule. You wave the forklift carrying the first capsule toward the loading pad. You raise your empty hand toward the small platform while the capsule leaves the line. At the final assembly line, you keep assembler tools out of your hands. You return the ribbon-cutting scissors beside the row of Allied flags. At the military acceptance zone, you follow the sealed transport capsule with your eyes. You understand the factory now works beyond your tools. At the open hangar door, you keep the bronze key in your hand. You remain at the open hangar door while the first transport capsule reaches the yard. In the secure factory yard, you stand behind the first serial transport capsule as the sealed capsule rolls out.